Our first speaker started out as a science teacher when the possibility of humans reaching Mars inspired him to begin a career in engineering. Decades and hundreds of technical and non-technical publications later, including the book, The Case for Mars, The Plan to Settle the Red Planet and Why We Must. Please welcome who I consider the most important influencer of the 21st century, our president of the Mars Society, Dr. Robert Zubrin.
Hello, and thank you, Lucinda, for that very generous introduction, and thanks all of you for coming. This is going to be a fantastic event. We now have 5,400 people registered. There's 150 speakers, and including the NASA administrator, and another one that I'm going to announce very shortly. But we are gathered here now at a time of unique opportunity, a juncture in time to set humanity's course towards Mars. Now, it is said, that politics is the art of the possible. Well, engineering is the art of making the impossible possible, okay? And in other words, engineering is upstream of politics. We make it possible and then they do it, okay? And there's no better example of a person who has shown that it is possible to make the impossible possible than Elon Musk. And so it is my great pleasure to announce to all of you that Elon Musk will be addressing the conference at 4 o'clock tomorrow. So get the word out on that, put that on your agenda. The talks that are there now will be moved back to make room for it. They'll be given shortly after he talks. But, what Musk and his team have shown that it is possible for a well-led entrepreneurial team to do things that had previously been thought necessary to take 10 times the cost, 3 times the time, and even deemed impossible to be done at all, such as reusable launch vehicles returning to their launch sites. And as a result, he has set off a wave of creative activity of other people getting into that game and related games. We're having private investment funding, SpaceX's for spacecraft and space instruments and all sorts of things. And collectively, this is going to make it all possible. And we'll be hearing a lot more about the SpaceX effort from Elon himself tomorrow. So I won't go into it, but suffice to say that from where we stand now, it looks like that relatively shortly in time, and whether it's this year, next year, the year after, within a very few years, there's going to be reusable heavy lift boosters with the capability of the Saturn V, but 1% the cost. And that is going to make a lot of things possible, including most notably humans to Mars. Okay, now where'd that come from? Okay, well, Musk was recruited by an idea. Okay, the idea that it is necessary to make humanity a spacefaring species, multi-planet civilization. A lot of his team, okay, and they work twice as hard as people at most aerospace companies and actually get paid less, but they do it because they believe in the idea, and that's why they make it happen. And these other people, and Victor Hugo said, nothing can stop an idea whose time has come. And that is true. If the idea has messengers that can recruit to its banners the forces required for it to prevail. And that's what we need to do. So we need to take advantage of this opportunity, now that this is becoming possible, to make Mars humanity's, put it on the agenda for this decade. Okay. Now, why should the goal be Mars? Okay. I will give you 4 reasons: for the science, for the challenge, for the future, and for our survival. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. First of all, for the science. Okay. Now, Mars is the Rosetta Stone for letting us know the truth about the potential prevalence and diversity of life in the universe. But that itself is only the entrance to the area of science. See, what is science? Science is mastery of the laws of a phenomenon, okay? To actually understand the laws governing a phenomenon. And this has many engineering implications. From the mid 1700s through the late 1800s, people mastered the laws of electricity and magnetism, and thus were able to introduce entire realms of technology that had been completely unexpected and unimagined before that. You know, starting with telegraphs and motors and going on to radio and television and now internets and all of this. And so it opens up new worlds. Now, in the 19th century, we mastered basically the laws of electromagnetism and chemistry, okay? And this created the world of the 20th century. But there's another science which is going to become increasingly important. I believe it's going to be the revolutionary science of the 21st century, and that is biology. And we only discovered the alphabet of biology 60 years ago, Watson and Crick, DNA, okay? We're still just basically learning our DNAs, our ABCs of biology. We don't know, we're beginning to learn to read it, but all life on Earth uses this one alphabet. It uses this one language. Is this true for life in the universe? Okay, it's one thing to be able to read, it's another thing to be literate. And, you know, if we go to Mars, we could find out if what we think is the language of life is the language of life, or it's just one example of a much vaster set of possibilities for the language of life, the system of information for carrying from one generation to the next. Okay, you know, we're going to discover what life is. And of course, we are life. We're going to discover what we are, okay, by going to Mars. And this is enlightenment, and the technological ramifications of this will be phenomenal, okay, as phenomenal as discovering the laws of electromagnetism, okay. Because what life is self-replicating nanomachines. We're just beginning to read it. What happens when we learn to program it, okay? What when we actually understand it? Then there's the challenge. I believe humans are like societies, are like individuals. We grow when we challenge ourselves, we stagnate when we do not. A Humans to Mars effort would be an inspiration, a challenge to every young person. Learn your science, and you could be part of this grand effort to explore and pioneer new worlds. And out of that, we would get millions of young engineers, scientists, inventors, technological entrepreneurs, doctors, medical researchers, just as we did from Apollo in the 60s when we doubled our science graduates. This would be global. It would include both men and women. It would be a tremendous impetus for human progress through the creation of capital. Okay. And then there is the future, okay, which is, okay, very simply, is that this is a beginning. If we do what we can do in our time, which is establish those first towns on Mars, those first exploration missions, bases, settlements, the seeds of new branches of human civilization on the world, we will open the door to humanity's career as a multi-planetary and ultimately interstellar civilization, such that 500 years from now, there will not only be new nations on Mars with new languages and cultures, and everything that goes with it, but on thousands of planets orbiting stars in this realm, a region of the galaxy. And, you know, they will have technologies that are unimagined. They will be multiple centers for creation of new science and technology. They will have new literatures. They will have new histories of great deeds that will be used to inspire people to do even grander things. And you know, that is something grand and wonderful that we can create. And when you have it in your power to create something grand and wonderful, then you should. And then finally, there is for our survival. And what do I mean by this? Do I mean, well, We should become spacefaring and go to Mars so that if the Earth is hit by an asteroid, there'll be some survivors elsewhere. That might be said to be one benefit, but that does not impress me at all. Even now, it is true, if we become spacefaring, we will have the capacity to redirect asteroids so they do not hit the Earth. So as far as that is concerned, I mean, we're not going to space to desert the Earth. We're going to space to protect the Earth. Okay, but it's more vital than that, because the chance of an asteroid impact in the 21st century is low. But there's a much more immediate threat to humanity. Okay, people talk about existential threats to humanity. They talk about climate change, resource exhaustion, possibility of global pandemics, and all these are issues to be contended with. But none of these were the cause of the great disasters of the 20th century. The great disasters of the 20th century weren't caused by natural disasters or resource exhaustion or climate change or anything of the sort. They were caused by something entirely different, which was bad ideas. And in particular, one bad idea. And what that bad idea was, which came in a number of forms, is that there isn't enough to go around. There's only so much here, and sooner or later we're going to have to fight over what it is and what is there. And if you have that mindset, well then for one side or the other, sooner is going to be more advantageous than later. So 1914, German general staff looked at the crisis and said, we're going to have to fight Russia sooner or later for control of Eurasia. Should it be sooner or later? They said, let's do it sooner before they industrialize. The same thing in 1939. And same thing with Japan's attempt to destroy China while it was weak. And today you have this emerging confrontation between the West and China, or apparent so, and I happen to know, because I have talked to them, that there are people in Washington, D.C. who believe that war with conflict with China is inevitable because there's only so much oil in the world, and if they all have cars, there isn't going to be enough for us. And you can bet that there are people in Beijing who are thinking exactly the same thing from the other side of the chessboard. And if this kind of thinking is allowed to prevail, we will destroy ourselves. Okay, but it's not true. It is not true that the human condition is one of disparate nations in a struggle for survival over limited resources. Rather, what is true is that we are a family of nations, rather disorderly families, to be sure, but a family which are each making different kinds of contributions to things that expand the human prospect. Okay, China is progressing rapidly right now because the technologies invented in the West. But the West's own technological revolution owes itself to technologies invented in China, like paper and printing and so forth. And inventions made everywhere ultimately contribute to and are used by people everywhere. Okay, so that is the truth. But people don't see it. It seems intuitively clear, falsely, but intuitively, that there is only so much, and so we do have to fight. But if we can show, if we can make it tangible, if we can make it sensuous, that there isn't a limit, that by working together, even if it's in a competitive way, as it probably will be, okay, but nevertheless, all working on a common project to open up a new planet, and it becomes clear that it is silly to be fighting over provinces, okay? And that it's not true that there's only so much to go around on Earth, because the Earth comes with an infinite sky, and it's possible to throw it wide open, okay? So let's make the impossible possible. That's what we need to do. And I'd be delighted to take questions. Are there questions, Jim?
Dr. Zubrin?
Yes.
How do you aim to combat the biological implications of the absence of a magnetosphere on Mars?
Okay, look, on Earth, we are not shielded from space radiation by the magnetosphere substantially. We are shielded by the atmosphere. The atmosphere that's above you, if you're at sea level, is equal to 10 meters of water sitting on top of you. That's massive shielding. The magnetosphere does provide some shielding against solar flares to people in Earth orbit. It does not shield against cosmic rays substantially, which is why the cosmic ray dose at the space station is about half of what you get in interplanetary space and about the same as what you would get on Mars, because the Earth beneath you blocks out half the sky, as Mars would if you were on it. In terms of Mars expeditions, the radiation dose is actually a minor portion of overall mission risk. In terms of Mars settlements, where you are raising children, you probably would want to adopt systems of architecture that shield out most of the radiation most of the time, so that most of the habitat could be underground. They could, you'd have domes above them, but whole systems analogous to subway systems on Earth of habitation below. And so there would be only modest radiation dose when you went to the surface to run your greenhouses or to explore.
Next question. What are your thoughts on the Superhook transportation system?
Well, I'm not familiar with anything of that name. I have heard of transportation systems called skyhooks or space elevators. Now, with current materials, space elevators are not possible on Earth. The mass of the tether, to make it strong enough to lift a load of any size off the surface of the Earth, would be trillions of times more than the mass of the payload. But this is because there's an exponential function of the strength of the tether to lift the actual load has to be a certain amount and therefore a certain thickness, and then the bit of tether above it has to lift both the payload and that bit of tether, and so on. Now on Mars, the gravity is only 1/3 Earth, and it turns out that you could use a skyhook on Mars. I would hang it from Phobos down, so it would travel over the equator, and it would have a velocity relative to the surface of Mars of about 600 meters a second, I think, as I recall. And what that means is that a rocket taking off from the surface of Mars could rendezvous with that on a suborbital trajectory and catch it, okay? And then ride it all the way up to orbit in Phobos or beyond Phobos. If there was a tether pointing outward, it could be sent back to Earth or out to the asteroid belt or anywhere you want to go. The advantage of this system, once you install it, is that taking off of Mars to say return to Earth, instead of requiring a 6 kilometer a second delta V, would only require a 0.6 kilometer a second, 1/10 as much propulsion. And so that'd be a very useful piece of infrastructure to put in place once Mars settlements are there to take advantage of it.
All right, thank you. Once the prohibitive bottleneck in transportation is resolved, what do you think is the next biggest challenge in establishing a permanent human settlement?
Well, okay, that's an excellent question. Okay, look, the SpaceX people are working on resolving the transportation system, which is the largest single piece of development that needs to be done to enable humans to Mars. But there's a whole bunch of other technologies that are needed. There are Mars spacesuits. There are surface power systems, and it'd be very advantageous, for example, to have nuclear power systems on the surface of Mars, because the solar energy there is only 40% as strong as Earth, and it's unreliable, can be shut out for months by dust storms. So we need space nuclear power. And this would be very difficult for a private enterprise company to develop because the materials are controlled. And then there's in situ resource utilization systems to make rocket fuel and oxygen on Mars, and automated greenhouse systems, and also surface mobility systems. And many of these things do not have as clear a commercial applicability as a space transportation system does, and therefore are also harder to develop in the private sector. And so I think what we're going to need to make this happen is a public-private partnership. But I think that by developing the transportation system, by basically holding out his hand to NASA and saying, meet me halfway, we'll be able to get them to meet halfway. I mean, starships will certainly be flying to orbit, in my view, by 2024. And, you know, someone's going to be elected president in 2024. And, you know, Winston Churchill once said that the American people can always be trusted on to do the right thing after they have exhausted all the alternatives. And, okay, so now we're trying a new alternative, and if that works out, fine. And if not, we'll try again in 2024. But look, if starships are flying to orbit in 2024, whoever's elected then will turn to his or her advisors and say, look at this. Can we have people on Mars by the end of my second term? And the answer is going to be yes. And will it cost hundreds of billions of dollars? No, it can probably be done within the existing NASA budget. Well, then let's meet them halfway. Let's develop this other stuff. Let's make this happen. I want this done by 2030, and it will be possible to be done by 2030. And you know, so we're going to have our job cut out for us to make it clear to the political class that the possible is now possible. But once that becomes clear, we can make it happen.
All right. This is a two-part question. What is the most important thing that individuals can do? And another question closely related is, what is the best way to reach our political representatives?
Well, look, there's all sorts of things that people can do. Okay, if you're a technical person, you can participate directly in the effort. You can enlist under the banner of SpaceX or Blue Origin or Lockheed Martin or NASA and lend your talents there, or you can join with others in starting your own entrepreneurial effort focused on meeting a key unmet need that to, once again, put another piece of the puzzle in place. Okay, so you can do that. Now, if you don't have technical or business ability so that you can't participate directly, you can help spread the word. You know, as I said, engineering is upstream of politics, but the thing that's even upstream of science and engineering is aspiration. And this is why, you know, the British poet Shelley said, poets are the legislators of mankind. They establish the vision, so you can write. Or if you're not good at writing, just spread the word in any way you can, okay? Help recruit more people to this effort, whether they are technical people or political people or anyone of this kind. So Mars needs engineers, Mars needs scientists, Mars needs businessmen, and Mars needs poets.
Next question. What is your position on using the moon as a means of reaching Mars ultimately?
I don't think that's a good plan. The delta V required to go from low Earth orbit to the surface of the moon is greater than that to go from low Earth orbit to the surface of Mars. So even if there was rocket propellant sitting on the surface of the moon today available for free to anyone that would drop by, it would not make sense to go there and get it. Now, if they launched it to lunar orbit and had it available there for you, then the delta V to go there and get it would be the same as going to Mars. So once again, not particularly useful. Now, this is not to say that we shouldn't go to the moon, but people advocating going to the moon should not say, and it is not useful for them to say to people wanting to go to Mars, you can't do your program until you do my program, okay? That is not true, and it is not useful. If we develop the capabilities that allow us to go to Mars, they will also allow us to go to the moon. If we, and there are some things to be done on the moon, but they are no means as profound as going to Mars. Now, I have to say that despite that, I have a mixed view on the NASA Artemis program, because I do think it is the wrong objective, but at least it is an objective. And by saying that the NASA Human Spaceflight Program is committed to accomplish something within a specified period of time, what the Bridenstine and the Pence have done is they have injected a lot of energy into NASA, into starting to think about, actually accomplishing projects. And if we did go to the moon before we went to Mars, that would certainly do a lot to restore NASA's can-do spirit. And there's a lot to be said for that in that respect. So we could go to the moon before we go to Mars. We could go to the moon after we go to Mars. We should go to both the moon and Mars. But it is simply, from an engineering point of view, not true that we need a lunar base or a lunar orbiting space station or a Mars orbiting space station to go to Mars. If you want to go to Mars, you figure out how to do that and not how to use the Mars mission as an excuse to justify a variety of other projects that don't necessarily contribute. I think we'll have a base on the moon. I think there's some things we can find out. I'd love to put some telescopes on the surface of the moon. But overall, in terms of how we make humanity into a spacefaring civilization, in terms of how we inspire the next generation to want to do great deeds, you're not going to do it with something to attempt to repeat what was done by their grandparents' generation. Once again, to establish a new branch of human civilization, we have to go to a place where there's the large majority of materials needed to create the resources for a civilization, and that is Mars.
Thank you. This question is from a high school student. What advice would you give her generation as far as preparing themselves to go to Mars?
Well, if you actually want to go to Mars, if you want to be in the first wave, you want to be a scientist or an engineer. So learn all the science and math that you can, or perhaps a biologist, perhaps a doctor. Okay, those are the professions that will be in the first wave that go to Mars. But ultimately, as Mars develops as a society, we'll need more than scientists and engineers and mechanics and agronomists. Okay, we're going to need teachers and playwrights and community orchestra directors. So we're going to need people of every skill and every talent. So this is a project for humanity, and everyone can participate, either here on Earth or in some cases by going to Mars themselves. So I think I'm out of time, and thank you very much. I look forward to the rest of the conference.